In all my years as a trauma nurse, I've learned to trust two things without question: vitals and silence. Not the kind of silence you hear in a quiet room, but the kind that creeps in after the chaos ends. The stillness after a flatline. The hush that follows a family's scream. You can get used to the blood, the broken bodies, the metallic stench of antiseptic soaked into your scrubs. But the silence, that gets in your bones. I'm Dana Whitaker, 42, charge nurse at St. Helens General in Western Michigan, and I've worked the ER night shift since I was 24. I've seen heart attacks, overdoses, gunshots, and the unthinkable things people do to themselves and each other. Eventually, your brain stops trying to make sense of it all. You patch the wounds, call the time, zip the bags, and move on, until something happens that makes you stop moving. That night was October 14th, a Friday. Early fall, so the ER had that mix of seasonal sniffles, drunks who'd pushed their luck, and a couple of high school football injuries. It was unusually busy, but nothing we couldn't handle. I was on with Dr. Patel, who liked to double-check every resident's work like he didn't trust any of them, and Nurse Holly, who was barely 2 months in and still jumped every time a monitor beeped. The worst we'd had so far that shift was a dislocated shoulder and a panic attack that mimicked a heart attack, common enough. We just rolled a seizure patient into observation when the radio crackled. Dispatched to St. Helens, incoming trauma. Male, 30s, motorcycle collision, no helmet, high velocity, ETA 3 minutes. I felt that shift in the air before they even wheeled him in. You learn to read it, how paramedics move when they think they've lost one. Not a run, not a panic, but a kind of rehearsed desperation. They came through the doors like a storm. Trauma room 7. We cleared it in seconds. I remember the gurney wheels skidding across the tile like they always do. But for some reason, this time it hit me differently. Like the sound was too loud. Like the whole hospital paused for a beat. The kind of beat you feel in your chest, not your ears. The patient was in rough shape. Name: Eric Mathers, 34, per his wallet ID. Road rash exposed the muscle and tendon down the left side of his body, like someone had tried to peel him open. His chest was caved on one side. There was so much blood that my first thought was, he's already gone. But they were doing compressions, bagging him, squeezing in fluids. Dr. Patel called for a crash cart. We worked him like it mattered. And maybe it did. Chest tube, paddles, epi, everything you'd see on a medical drama, only without the music. Just alarms and commands and breathless shouting. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. We stepped back, quiet, hands shaking. I checked the clock. Then I zipped the bag myself because I always do it when the death is messy. It's a stupid kind of respect, but it feels right. He looked peaceful. Not in the poetic way people say, but in that raw, slack-jawed, frozen state that's more chemical than emotional. Like someone paused him mid-sentence. He was just done. We left him in there, lights low like we always do for a few minutes. It's not about ghosts or souls or any of that. It's about dignity. Letting the dead have a moment before the porters haul them off like cargo. I asked Holly to stand by the door. She looked pale, but nodded. I went to the nurse's station to pull the paperwork, wipe the blood off my arms and breathe. And then I heard it. The scream. It was guttural, raw, long. Not a noise, not a groan, not air escaping post-mortem. This was a scream. The kind of sound that comes from a living throat. Pain, rage, terror. All of it wrapped into one inhuman howl. I looked up fast. Holly was already backing away from room 7, white as a sheet. One of the techs froze mid-step in the hallway, eyes wide. I met them at the door. "You heard that, right?" I asked. Holly nodded without speaking. I opened the door, lights steady, no flicker, no sudden cold, no monitors flashing back to life. Just the still form of Eric Mathers, zipped halfway in a body bag, his mouth gaping open as if he'd just finished making that sound. No pulse, no respiration, still dead, cold. But that room felt full, like something had just left it, or hadn't yet. I walked in slowly, checked everything again. Reflexes, pupils, nothing. I unzipped the bag a few inches and rechecked vitals, more to reassure myself than anything else. Still nothing. We pulled the hallway footage later. The camera showed Holly stepping back. It showed me walking in. No one entered or exited. No movement in the room. But you can hear it. That scream. Muffled, but clear. And definitely coming from inside the sealed trauma room. I logged it clinically. Unexplained auditory anomaly reported in Trauma Room 7. No changes in patient vitals. No staff presence inside at time of occurrence. Witnessed by multiple employees. I didn't write "dead man screamed" because I'm not insane. Holly didn't want to talk about it. But later that night, as I sat in the break room with my sandwich untouched, she came in and stood there, arms crossed. What if... She started, then hesitated. What if he didn't know he was dead yet? I didn't answer. 2 weeks later. Room 7 stayed empty longer than it should have. That wasn't policy. It just worked out that way. People didn't want to use it. No one said it out loud. Then we got a new patient in there. Diabetic ketoacidosis, not trauma. Stable, older man. He survived. But something was off. The night nurse, Kevin, said the guy kept asking who the screaming man was. Claimed he saw someone at the foot of the bed at 2 a.m., just standing there, mouth open like he wanted to say something but couldn't. That patient was lucid. No history of dementia. Labs normal. He was discharged the next morning and died of a heart attack 3 days later. Backstory surfaced quietly. One of the residents was nosy enough to Google Eric Mathers. Not that we're supposed to, but we're human. Turns out the guy was a volunteer firefighter years ago. In 2015, he responded to a rollover accident. 3 teenagers. Only one made it. Mathers had pulled a boy from the car who was still breathing, then had to step away when the vehicle caught fire. The kid screamed, and kept screaming while the flames took him. There was an inquiry. Mathers wasn't blamed. But his records showed something. 4 ER visits in the years that followed for chest pain and insomnia. PTSD. He'd stopped responding to emergency calls the year before his crash. You could read that how you want. Maybe he ran from his guilt until it caught up with him. Maybe that scream he made wasn't about him. Maybe it was something he'd carried so long it got lodged in his bones and only came out once he was quiet enough to let it. Present day. We've remodeled since. Trauma room. 7 has a different bed now. New monitor, fresh paint. But I still walk past sometimes and catch myself holding my breath. Not out of fear. Out of something else. Respect, maybe. Whatever happened that night, and I don't pretend to understand it, I believe it was real. And I believe there's something worse than death. Not knowing it happened. Not being ready. I've heard a lot of screams in this job. But that one still echoes in the quiet. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the ER calms and the silence settles in again, I hear something far off. A scratch in the air. A breath not taken. And I wonder if fear follows, even after the heart stops. I thought I'd seen everything. That's the lie we tell ourselves, the armor we wear. You don't work in the emergency department at Eastgate Memorial for more than 5 years without picking up scars. Some on the skin, most buried deep. Gunshot wounds, mangled car crash victims, overdoses, sobbing families, people laughing 5 minutes before they seize and die. You learn to ride it, to detach just enough to function, to keep your hands steady even as someone's world ends in front of you. But that night, it still follows me. My name is Dr. Adrian Ross. I've been an ER attending for nearly a decade now. Eastgate is a mid-sized city in the Midwest. Big enough for violence, small enough for people to know your name when you're off shift. I did my residency in Chicago. Thought nothing would top that chaos. I was wrong. Small cities have their own brand of unpredictable. I wasn't on call that night. I'd swapped shifts with Javi, one of our newer attendings, because his sister was visiting. I didn't mind. Friday nights usually brought in the usual mess. Bar fights, drunk drivers, domestic disputes, maybe the occasional cardiac arrest. But nothing prepared me for Nathan. It was 9:42 p.m. when the call came in from EMS. Young male, mid-20s, found unresponsive on his apartment floor by his roommate. Breathing shallow, non-verbal. GCS score 3. Pupils fixed and dilated. I was standing at the nurse's station with Lexi, one of our senior nurses, reviewing a chart from a combative psych patient who'd just been transferred upstairs. When the radio cracked with the incoming call, Lexi and I locked eyes. GCS of 3, she murmured. That's basically comatose. Fixed and dilated, I said softly. Shit. We moved. Room 3 was prepped in under 2 minutes. Vitals monitors ready, crash cart outside the door, intubation tray open. The paramedics wheeled him in. Young man, maybe 25, pale, slightly unshaven, still in pajama pants and a hoodie. There was something disturbingly normal about how he looked. No blood, no bruising, just a guy who looked like he should be watching Netflix, not lying half dead on a gurney. Name's Nathan Hart, one of the medics said. Roommate found him like this around 9. He was last seen alert maybe 2 hours before that, eating dinner. No known medical history, no drugs in the apartment. No trauma? I asked, listening to his breath sounds as I took over the bag valve mask. None we could find. He's breathing on his own, but irregular. Heart rate's 82, BP 120/70. Pupils were still blown. No corneal reflex, no pain response. His hands were warm, chest rising slowly. But he wasn't there. CT scan was done within 15 minutes. Massive cerebral edema, the radiologist said. Midline shift, brainstem compressed. It's herniation, full. I felt my throat tighten. I'd seen strokes before, older patients, heavy smokers, uncontrolled diabetics. But Nathan was 25. No hypertension, no warning signs, no reason. Neurology confirmed it within the hour. Dr. Chen, the attending, ran the full battery of brain death tests. Cold calorics, apnea test, doll's eyes, nothing. Flat EEG. He's gone, Chen said gently, not even trying to sugarcoat it. Legally and clinically. Brain death, I nodded, jaw tight. Nathan's mother, a woman named Elaine, arrived around 11:30 with her 2 daughters, Rachel and Becca. I'd had to give hard news before, but never like this. Elaine didn't scream, didn't collapse. She just blinked and said, "He was just eating pizza. He said he'd do the dishes after his show." They agreed to organ donation. Elaine said he was a registered donor. "He'd want to help," she said, voice cracking. The ICU team took over around midnight. I usually bow out at that point, but something in me stayed. Maybe it was because he looked alive. His heart was still beating, chest still rising, skin warm. The ventilator hissed, a lullaby of breath. But there was nothing behind his eyes. No presence. Just a shell. Lexi and I stood in the hallway as they wheeled him to the surgical floor. "It's always weirder when they look peaceful," she murmured. "Like they're just waiting." I know. It was 2:14 a.m. when an OR nurse named Jordan found me. "Dr. Ross, you should come upstairs." "What's wrong?" She hesitated. "They haven't started. The heart, it reacted." My stomach sank. Reacted how? "Just come." The surgical suite was quiet. Too quiet. The transplant team stood in a semicircle around the open body of Nathan Hart. The lead surgeon, Dr. Ramesh Kapoor, was holding his gloves in one hand, looking visibly shaken. His assistant stood near the table, pale. "What happened?" I asked. Kapoor looked up. "We were prepping, standard protocol, opened the chest, no stimulation, no clamps yet. I touched the heart, just laid a hand on it." He paused. It hit back. "Excuse me?" It pounded. Once, then again, then faster. Not a fibrillation. A rhythm. Like it was aware. A silence fell. He wasn't a dramatic man. I'd seen him calmly perform transplants during literal blackouts. "Did you monitor it?" I asked. "No leads yet. We weren't at that stage." But one of the assistants swore she saw a spike on the EKG screen nearby, just for a second. "But there was no patient connected," I said. He just nodded. We all felt it. The team waited. 10 minutes, then 15. They repeated the brain death tests. Nothing had changed. Still legally dead. Eventually, the procedure proceeded. The heart was transplanted into a 38-year-old man in critical failure. It beat. It worked. It thrived. But none of us forgot. I started having dreams. Not nightmares. Just quiet. I'd be standing in an empty hallway hearing the beep of a heart monitor, rhythmic, steady. I'd follow it to a closed door. Inside, Nathan would be lying in a hospital bed, eyes open. "I'm not ready," he'd whisper. His mother called the hospital 2 weeks later, not for a complaint, just a question. "Do you know where his heart went?" "We can't disclose that information," I said gently. "I know," she said. "It's just, I had a dream. I saw him standing in the hallway. He was looking for something. I think he was trying to find his way back." 3 months later, I ran into Kapoor in the hallway. "How's the recipient?" He hesitated. "Healthy. Strong heart, but he's reporting dreams. He says he sees places he's never been, names he doesn't know. He asked his wife who Rachel and Becca were. I felt my blood run cold. He doesn't remember saying it. Says he wakes up crying sometimes. Says he hears a voice saying, 'I'm not ready.'" Science tells us that memories live in the brain, that emotions are chemicals, not spirits. But the body, especially the heart, has rhythm, memory of its own kind, autonomic, persistent. I still work at Eastgate, still take shifts, still ride the rhythm of the ER, but I never forgot Nathan Hart. His heart saved a man, but part of him never left, because sometimes the mind lets go, but the heart remembers. I don't believe in signs, not anymore. You work enough night shifts in a trauma ward, and the magic bleeds out of things. You see too much, the raw, ugly truth of accidents and emergencies. You learn that most things don't happen for a reason. They just happen. But some nights still find a way to leave a crack in your logic. Let me take you back. Not to a haunted house or some cursed artifact, just a regular Tuesday at Memorial West Medical Center in Springfield, a city hospital tucked off I-44, where we never have enough beds, never enough staff, and way too many incoming calls. I'd been a trauma nurse for 11 years, seen it all. The senseless shootings, the pile-up crashes, people brought in torn apart, sometimes literally. You get desensitized, yeah, but not numb. At least, I wasn't yet. My name's Naomi Brooks. I was 36 that year, with a kid just starting middle school, an ex-husband who still texted on birthdays, and a second-hand Toyota that rattled when I turned left. Real glamorous life. Anyway, it started as a normal shift. I clocked in at 6:42 p.m., threw my hair up, grabbed a stale coffee from the staff lounge, and did my usual rounds. Bay 3 had an overdose from the shelters. Room 6 had a guy who thought he was having a heart attack, but really just needed a Xanax and someone to talk to. The trauma pager went off at 7:11 p.m. "MVC incoming," dispatch said through the crackling radio. "Female, early 30s, sedan versus pickup, ejected on impact, estimated arrival 7 minutes." I scribbled the info down and alerted the team. Dr. Liang, one of our trauma surgeons, was already pulling gloves on before I finished the sentence. The ambulance pulled up at 7:19 p.m. They wheeled her in fast, pale, unconscious, blood matting her light brown hair. The right side of her face was already swelling. A paramedic shouted vitals as we cut open her clothes and started the trauma protocol. Clara Reynolds, 35, found unresponsive, coded once en route, got her back after 3 minutes, pelvis crushed, BP tanking. I remember her necklace, a thin silver chain with a small charm that read, "Breathe." I kept looking at it while bagging her, pushing air into lungs that weren't holding their own anymore. "Get Oneg up here now," Dr. Liang snapped. "Page Orr. We've got seconds." We were in the thick of it when triage called out from the double doors. "Naomi." Kim, one of our newer nurses, waved me over. Another trauma just called in. Woman, same age, solo vehicle, unconscious at the scene. Name's Clara too. I froze, halfway through hanging another bag of fluids. "Same name?" Kim nodded, eyes uncertain. "Yeah, Clara. Clara Simmons. Date of birth? March 14th, 1989. What? I said. My throat felt dry. That's the same birth date as this one. Kim gave a half laugh like she thought it was weird but not worth dwelling on. Just a glitch, probably a mix-up with IDs. We both knew it wasn't, but it was easier to pretend. I went back to the first Clara, helped prep her for emergency surgery. She coded again. We got her back. For a while. But her body wasn't holding on. We called time of death at 8:04 p.m. She was gone. Just like that. 1 minute you're fighting for someone's life, next you're pulling the sheet over their face, and then the doors burst open again. Second Clara, someone muttered. The paramedics rolled her in fast. She looked nothing like the first. Dark skin, tight curls matted with blood, a long healed scar along her forearm, clothes torn from the accident. Her lips were moving as we transferred her to the table. She's trying to say something, Dr. Liang noted. I leaned close, held her hand. Her eyes fluttered, lips dry and cracked. She's waiting, she whispered. I blinked. Who's waiting? She tried again. She's waiting. That was all. Then her heart rate spiked. We lost her pulse 30 seconds later. 12 minutes of CPR. No response. Called at 8:18 p.m. You want to say it's coincidence? You need it to be coincidence. That's the only way to function. You bury it under paperwork, time of death, vital signs, lab results. But that night made the hairs on my arms stand up. We ran every check, compared photos, names, birth certificates, social security numbers, different women, no blood relation, no shared hometowns, one from Branson, one from Fayetteville, no overlap. They were both named Clara, born on the same day, died in the same ER, 14 minutes apart. For a few days, the staff laughed it off. Doppelgangers, glitches in the matrix. But the jokes faded fast. People started avoiding room 4. Nurses claimed the vitals monitor would spike at night even when no one was in there. Kim swore she heard breathing in the room once while turning down the lights. I told her it was probably the HVAC, but deep down I didn't believe it. A week later, I stayed late. Charting. Catching up. It was just after 2 a.m. and the ER was quiet for once. I passed room 4 on my way to the vending machines. The light inside was flickering. I paused. I don't know why. But I stepped inside. It smelled like antiseptic and dust. The bed was stripped bare, the monitors off. Nothing out of place. But I felt watched, like someone was holding their breath in the corner. I turned around and saw nothing, except on the bed, a small charm, silver. Breathe. I didn't tell anyone, just picked it up and put it in my pocket. I still have it. Sometimes I think about taking it back, leaving it where it came from, but I don't know what that would mean. And I'm not sure I want to find out. Weeks passed, then months. Another trauma night. We got a Jane Doe. Car accident. No ID, broken pelvis, dark curly hair, scar on her arm. I felt my stomach drop. She's not Clara, the paramedic said when I asked. She said her name was Mara. We saved her. She woke up the next morning, disoriented but stable. I walked in to check on her and froze. She was staring at the ceiling, tears slipping down her face. She told me, she whispered. I didn't ask who. I just sat down beside her. She told me not to go, she said. Said it wasn't my time, that she was still waiting for someone. I swallowed. Who is she waiting for? Mara looked me dead in the eye. You. That was 3 years ago. I've changed hospitals since then, moved to a smaller clinic outside Joplin. Slower pace, less trauma. But some nights I dream about the ER, about room 4, about the 2 Claras, one pale, one dark, both broken, both whispering something that doesn't quite fit in a medical report. And every time I wake up, I check my pocket. The charm is always there. Breathe. But some nights I swear I feel someone else exhale with me. I've worked night shifts at Pine Brook General for almost 8 years, and in that time I've seen the usual trauma. Car wrecks, overdoses, gunshot wounds, neglected elderly patients found unconscious in apartments that reeked of rot and cat urine. Every nurse has their stories. We tell them to each other like campfire tales during slow shifts. Some funny, some sad, some so bizarre you'd think we made them up. But there's one night I never tell. Not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, but because I still don't understand what really happened. My name's Leah Brandt. I'm 34, a trauma-certified RN with a specialty in psychiatric stabilization. I work the ER because I like the pace. The chaos, in some strange way, makes sense to me. There's order in it under the surface. Charts to follow, vitals to stabilize, protocol to cling to when everything else is spiraling. I've seen death. I've touched it, pronounced it, zipped it into body bags. I've cried in the supply closet after a failed code. I've cursed the ceiling in an empty hallway. But this was different. It was a Tuesday in early October. My fiancé, Joel, had just left for a 3-day conference in Charlotte. I kissed him goodbye around 2 p.m., made some tea, then took a nap before my 7 p.m. shift. That was the last completely normal moment I remember having. Pinebrook's night ER shifts always start slow. People don't usually get stabbed or crash their cars until later. Around 10:30, I was in trauma room 2, checking on a drunk who'd fallen down his apartment stairs when the call came over the radio. Unit 231 inbound, unidentified male, mid-40s, altered mental status, non-violent but uncooperative, no injuries, picked up outside Mercy Chapel on Wilton Drive. The charge nurse Jenny raised an eyebrow. No injuries? Apparently just screaming in the parking lot. PD was called but stood down. No crime committed. He's just off. Drugs? I asked. They said no needle marks. Looks clean. EMTs are guessing psychosis. You want him? I hesitated. I'd had a rough week. 3 back-to-back psychs, including one guy who tried to cut out his own tongue. But Jenny looked tired too. We all did. Yeah, I said. I've got it. Room 4. The man came in wearing only black sweatpants and a torn undershirt, barefoot despite the chill. No shoes, no wallet, nothing in his pockets, not even lint. His skin was pale, almost gray in the fluorescent light, and his hair looked damp with sweat. The paramedics had restrained him, soft cuffs only, but said he hadn't fought. Just wouldn't stop muttering. When I walked in, he stopped, not slowed down. Stopped. Completely still, like a switch flipped off. His eyes, hazel, with oddly dilated pupils, locked on mine. No blinking. Hi there, I said, keeping my voice even. My name's Leah. I'm your nurse tonight. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then slowly, as if he'd just remembered how speech worked, he said, Leah Brandt. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I felt a jolt behind my ribs. You've been here before? I asked, checking his wristband. Of course there was nothing. No ID, no hospital number. Just John Doe. Did someone tell you my name? He didn't respond, just kept staring. I looked down at my badge, clipped to my scrubs. Maybe he'd seen it. Maybe one of the medics said it. But something about the way he said it, it had weight. Can you tell me your name? I asked, taking a seat at the computer station inside the room. Do you know where you are? That's when the muttering started again. Fast, jumbled. I couldn't make out words at first, it sounded like tongues. Then I realized it was speech, just backward, not nonsense, not random, reversed phrases, over and over. Deliver us. He is not here. The light cannot save you. My hands trembled a little as I typed in a preliminary chart. I've heard all sorts of word salad from patients before. Schizophrenia, religious mania, meth-induced psychosis. But this wasn't that. His cadence was too specific, rehearsed, like a tape loop set to rewind. The charge doctor, Klein, came in 5 minutes later. He's one of those older ER physicians who's seen everything and reacts to nothing. Vitals are normal? He asked, flipping through the monitor readings. Stable, no fever, no signs of trauma. Tox screen? Negative. No head injury? None visible. Pupils are equal and reactive. Dr. Klein stood at the foot of the bed and said, "Sir, do you know where you are?" The man just smiled faintly and said, "The doors will not hold." Dr. Klein looked at me. "Page Psych, start him on 5 of Haldol, 2 of Ativan IM." I nodded, already prepping the injection. As I leaned over with the syringe, the man turned his head slowly toward me and whispered, "Don't go home tonight." The needle slipped in my hand. I had to steady myself before I could inject him. Later that night, 2:12 a.m., the man was sedated, monitored, stable, still muttering occasionally but not thrashing. Security stayed nearby just in case. I was finishing charting in the hallway when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I never answer unknowns during shift, but I had a strange pull in my chest. I stepped outside into the ambulance bay and picked up. "Hello?" There was static. Then a voice, quiet, hoarse, barely audible. "He's not sedated. He's watching you from the inside." The line went dead. I stood there, heart pounding. I tried calling the number back. Disconnected. When I walked back into the ER, room 4's monitor showed steady vitals, still sedated. But when I glanced at the window, the man was sitting upright, staring directly at me. My younger sister, Emily, had been in a group home for the past 7 years, schizoaffective disorder. When she was 20, she stopped sleeping, stopped eating, started talking to people who weren't there. Once she disappeared for a week and was found sitting in the middle of a cemetery, arms covered in scratches, speaking Latin. Our parents tried everything. Meds, inpatient, prayer. Nothing helped. I became her guardian 2 years ago when our mom died. I visited every Sunday, except this week. Joel's trip, my shifts, it got away from me. 3:07 a.m. I was reviewing labs when the intercom buzzed. Security. "Leah, we've got a woman trying to get in through the ambulance entrance, no ID, says she's your sister." My stomach dropped. "She what?" "Won't give her name. Just keep saying, 'I have to warn her. He's not what he seems.'" I rushed to the bay. It was Emily, hair tangled, eyes wild, wearing slippers and a hoodie. I hadn't seen her like this in years. She lunged toward me as soon as I got close. "You brought it here," she hissed. "You shouldn't have talked to him. You let him in." "Emily, how did you get out?" "You were safe." They opened the gate and it walked through wearing a man's skin. Security held her back as she screamed. I stood there, frozen. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. When the John Doe first came in, he smiled. Not in greeting, not in comfort, in recognition. Emily was taken back to her facility. I stayed to finish my shift, but I kept feeling watched. The lights in room 4 flickered around 4 a.m. The monitor glitched, but vitals stayed stable. Then the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't just the patient. I heard it in the vents, in the hallway, whispers in reverse. My name, over and over. Leah, 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 until the syllables lost meaning. At 4:43 a.m., the John Doe flatlined. No code, no warning. He just died, Dr. Klein pronounced. The body was sent to the morgue. But when I looked at the sheet covering him, there was something written in black marker on the underside, facing the body. "You brought the gatekeeper." No one knew who wrote it. Security footage showed nothing. 3 days later, Joel came home. I told him bits and pieces, blamed the stress. That night I woke up to find him standing at the foot of the bed, eyes open, staring. I whispered his name. He said, in a voice not quite his, "Do not open the second door." Then he collapsed, unconscious. He didn't remember it in the morning. Now that was 6 months ago. The man from room 4 was never identified, no family, no records. His body disappeared from the morgue 3 days later. No explanation. Emily's condition deteriorated. She no longer speaks English, only reversed Latin. I still work at Pinebrook, still take night shifts. But some nights, in the quiet hours, I hear whispers in the vents, the sound of reversed scripture. And sometimes when I check in on new patients, they say my name before I introduce myself. like they already know me, like something passed through me that night and stayed behind. And I can't help but think, what if hospitals aren't just places where people die? What if they're where something else is born? In the end, it was the silence that got to me the most. Not the screaming or the alarms or the coughing fits in the middle of the night. Not the machines flatlining or the code blues echoing down the hall. It was the quiet, the kind that stretches just a little too long. The kind that creeps under your skin and waits there, pulsing. I never intended to work nights, especially not at Briarfield General. The hospital was older than it looked, tucked between a strip mall and an abandoned Catholic school on the edge of Ridley, Pennsylvania. A small town trying to act bigger than it was. The kind of place people moved to for peace and ended up with nothing but stillness. I started as a CNA, certified nursing assistant, after a tough breakup and a relocation I hadn't planned. My mom's sister, Aunt Rena, lived in Ridley. She had a spare room and a need for someone to pay half the electric bill. I needed a job that didn't require a degree and didn't mind long hours. The night shift was all that was open. So I took it. It was supposed to be temporary. You know how that goes. I worked the trauma wing. Not ICU, not ER. Just the weird middle ground for patients not quite stable enough for standard med-surg, but not bad enough for intensive care. Room 9 was at the far end of the hallway, next to a busted linen closet we never used because the door didn't latch right. The whole wing had 12 rooms, but room 9 was the one everyone joked about, or tried to. They said the call light went off by itself, that patients who stayed there saw things, said things. I didn't think much of it. Nurses are a practical bunch. You have to be. The human body is a messy, fragile thing, and there's no time for ghost stories when someone's blood pressure is crashing. But sometimes I wonder if we keep busy just to keep from noticing what's really around us. It started with Mr. Grayson, 84, admitted with a pelvic fracture after a fall down his front porch steps. He had mild dementia, nothing severe. Still called his daughter every morning. Still recognized his primary doc by name, a tall, thin man with long fingers and sad blue eyes. He always smiled when I brought him ice water. "Thanks, sweetheart," he'd say. "Don't know what I'd do without you." He was sweet, grateful. But he didn't like the corner chair. Room 9 had one of those cheap vinyl-covered guest chairs in the far left corner by the window. Same model every room had, beige and creaky. One night while I was fluffing his pillows, Mr. Grayson reached out and tugged on my sleeve. "Don't turn your back to him," he whispered. I froze. "To who?" He nodded toward the chair. The man sitting there. I glanced back. Empty. "Can you describe him?" Mr. Grayson tilted his head, thinking. "Military type, hat in his lap. Doesn't move much." I smiled gently. "Maybe it's the pain meds. You're on a new dose tonight." He didn't argue, just nodded and closed his eyes. The second time was worse. A week later, a woman named Edna Rourke was admitted. Mid-70s, advanced pancreatic cancer. Nothing more to be done. DNR was already signed. Her family had flown in from Oregon, but they weren't staying overnight. She was alert, calm, even made a few jokes about her own condition. But on her third night, she refused to lie on her left side. I came in for rounds and she looked pale, tense, like something had startled her awake. "Is he still there?" she asked without looking at me. I knew instantly what she meant. I didn't answer. "He's polite," she continued, voice thin. "Doesn't say much. Just watches. But I feel like he's waiting. For me." I sat with her for 10 minutes longer than I was supposed to, just holding her hand. Eventually, she dozed off. She died that morning, peacefully. No struggle. I remember thinking maybe she'd made peace with it. But something about the way her eyes had flicked toward that chair before she drifted off stayed with me. I talked to Megan about it next. She was the night charge nurse, 15 years at Briarfield. The kind of woman who could tape a split IV line with one hand while answering a call light with the other. "You've seen it, haven't you?" I asked her during a slow shift around 3 a.m. She didn't look at me right away, just took a long sip from her Diet Coke and finally said, "Room 9's always been different." "Different how?" "You'll think I'm nuts." I already do. She gave a dry laugh, then leaned against the counter. We had a guy, back in 2007, Vietnam vet. No family, no next of kin. Brought in for pneumonia. Had a cardiac arrest right there in the room. They tried to resuscitate him for 22 minutes. He died. Alone. We didn't even know his first name at first. Just had a VA card with J. Benton on it. What happened after? She shrugged. Nothing dramatic, but weird stuff started. Light going on in the bathroom when no one was there. 4 pumps beeping with no alarms. Patients talking about a man watching them. And he always sits in the same chair? Always. She rubbed her arms like she was cold. I don't think he's bad. I think he just stayed. Maybe he thinks he's still on duty, still waiting to be relieved. Things escalated with Anna Clark, young, just 33. Post-op after emergency surgery for an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. She was doing fine, physically. But on her second night, she hit the call light repeatedly. I came in, and she was curled up on her side, facing the wall, crying. I don't want to die, she whispered. You're not dying, Anna, I said gently. I saw him. He was sitting there, just looking at me. Who? She turned and pointed toward the corner. That man, military, like old-timey, green coat, boots. I looked at him and just knew he was here for me. I sat with her until she calmed down. She didn't sleep that night, but she didn't die either. In fact, she made a full recovery and was discharged a week later. I caught her in the lobby on her way out. Was it a dream? She asked me. I didn't know how to answer. I started noticing the cold, not the hospital chill that seeps from bad insulation or overworked AC. This was different, localized, like standing in front of an open freezer. Only in that one corner, only sometimes. I asked maintenance to check the vents. They did, found nothing wrong. I asked housekeeping if anyone had complained. They just shook their heads. I even stood in the corner myself one night, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. It wasn't. It was like standing next to a still body. Not wind, not airflow, just presence. Then came Nora King. She wasn't a patient. She was my friend. A nurse's aide like me. She was pulling an extra shift, filling in for someone on sick leave. She'd never believed in the Room 9 rumors, called them boredom-fueled nurse folklore. Then one night she was the first to respond to a fall alarm from Room 9. The patient had tried to get out of bed without calling, nothing major. But when Nora came back to the nurse's station, she was shaking, pale. She wouldn't talk about it until the end of the shift. I saw him, she whispered, standing this time, not sitting. That was new. What did he do? Just looked at me, then faded, like smoke, gone in 3 seconds. She never picked up another shift in that wing again. It's been 4 years now. We've stopped joking about Room 9. Even the new grads sense it after a few shifts. Patients still talk about the man, still describe the same thing. Hat and lap, green uniform, boots. We still can't find any record of a J. Benton in the system. No next of kin, no discharge papers. Just a ghost of a man who died alone in a beige hospital room and maybe never realized he was allowed to leave. I don't think he's malevolent. I think he's waiting. For what? I don't know. Maybe for orders. Maybe for forgiveness. Maybe to make sure no one else has to go alone. Me? I greet him now, softly. Every night. Evening, sir, I'll say as I pass Room 9. Everyone's accounted for. And maybe that's all he wants to hear. Maybe that's all any of us want. Someone to check in, someone to say, I see you. Because hospitals are full of echoes, old footsteps, lives half remembered, words spoken just before the end. And sometimes, even in the brightest corners, shadows linger. I still remember the first night I worked the graveyard shift at West Pine General. It was one of those slow-burning November evenings where the air was cold enough to sting your lungs, and the fog came in waves so thick the hospital's entrance sign flickered in and out like a dying beacon. I had just finished orientation earlier that week, long days of protocols, paperwork, and polite nods from nurses too tired to care about another new hire. But that Friday night was my first real shift. The kind where you're truly on your own. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, eager, nervous, and filled with the kind of textbook confidence that only lasts until your first code blue. My name's Rachel Langley, and I had just moved 2 towns over to be closer to West Pine. It was one of those older regional hospitals, the kind built in the 60s, long white halls that echoed, and walls that looked like they hadn't been painted in at least 20 years. Still, it had a good reputation. It was quiet. Safe. At least, that's what I thought. That night, I clocked in at 10:45 p.m. sharp. The floor was unusually still, except for the distant hum of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. I was assigned to the med-surg unit on the 3rd floor, and my supervisor, a grizzled woman named Marcia, gave me the usual, "Don't screw it up" rundown, and handed me a stack of charts. "Room 314 is restless," she muttered. "Mr. Hobbs, terminal. Morphine drips running low. Keep an eye. He's been talking to people who aren't there." "Hallucinations?" I asked, pen poised. She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just seeing things we don't." I forced a chuckle. "That's comforting." Marcia didn't laugh. She just adjusted her cardigan, which hung off her thin frame like an old curtain, and walked off down the hall. The shift started normally. Vitals, chart updates, a patient complaining about the dinner meatloaf, another trying to convince me he didn't need his heart meds anymore because he felt better. It was the usual rhythm of midnight care, small tasks that stack up and keep you grounded. By 2 a.m., things had settled. I sat at the nurse's station with Megan, another night nurse barely older than me, her brown curls tied up in a messy bun. She was in her 2nd year at West Pine and had the weariness of someone who'd already seen too much. "You're holding up well," she said, sipping from a large thermos. "Most new grads cry by their 2nd shift." I smiled. "I haven't ruled it out yet." We both laughed. The kind of laugh that means you're tired and just holding it together. That's when we heard it. A soft ding. Not the overhead call bell, but the sound of room 301's door creaking open. We both turned. The lights at that end of the hallway flickered slightly, and I saw a figure walk past. Slow, calm, deliberate. An older woman in a pale uniform. I thought maybe it was Marcia, but something didn't feel right. "You see that?" I asked. Megan was staring down the hall, brows furrowed. "Yeah, who was that?" I stood up, already unsettled. "Marcia, maybe?" "Marcia's on break. She goes to the basement lounge at 2. I started walking toward the hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet. When I turned the corner, the hallway was empty. Room 301's door was half open. That room was vacant. I glanced inside. The bed was stripped, lights off, no signs of movement. Still, something felt heavy, like the air was thicker inside, like someone had just left a moment before I walked in. When I got back to the desk, Megan was pale. "I don't want to freak you out," she whispered, "but you know about Evelyn, right?" I shook my head. "Who's Evelyn?" She hesitated. She was a night nurse here. Used to work this very floor for over 30 years. Everyone loved her. Quiet, gentle, the kind of nurse people say made dying a little less scary. I waited, sensing there was more. "She passed away 5 years ago, heart attack, died in this hospital. Some say she never left." I laughed, reflexively, nervously. "Come on." Megan didn't smile. "You think you saw Marcia? I think you saw her." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt tight, but I chalked it up to sleep deprivation. "You'll see her again," Megan said softly, almost regretfully. Over the next few weeks, it happened again. And again. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always when the halls were quiet and the world seemed paused. Some nurses said she appeared in room 312, just standing at the foot of the bed, hands folded, watching over patients as they slept. A CNA swore she felt someone take the chart from her hands only to find it placed neatly on the counter 5 feet away. And patience. One night, A woman recovering from surgery asked me to thank the old nurse with the kind eyes for sitting with her and humming her to sleep. I hadn't been in her room for hours. Her monitor had been adjusted perfectly, better than I'd ever seen. Still, no one admitted to being there. Then came the night I stopped doubting. It was mid-December. Snow had started falling outside. The hospital was understaffed due to the flu, and I was pulling a double shift. At 3:15 a.m., I went to check on Mr. Hobbs in 314 again. I paused outside the door. It was cracked open and I could hear a soft voice inside. I entered quietly. Mr. Hobbs, pale, skeletal, was smiling. "You came back," he said. I blinked. "Mr. Hobbs, it's Rachel. Just checking on you." He looked past me toward the chair in the corner. "She was just there," he whispered. "Said she'd stay with me until I wasn't scared anymore." I looked. The chair was empty, but it was warm, like someone had just stood up. I asked around. Not officially. Nurses talk best when they think no one's really listening. Some rolled their eyes. Others, especially the long-timers, just gave quiet nods. One nurse, Teresa, told me she'd heard humming during a code once, as if someone were soothing the chaos. Another swore Evelyn had nudged her awake seconds before a monitor flatlined. It was always subtle, always gentle. She never scared anyone, she never hurt anyone, she just helped. But then, the dream started. Not for me, for Megan. She came in one night looking shaken. Her eyes were red, hands trembling. "I think she's trying to say something," she whispered. I didn't understand. I saw her in my dream. Evelyn. She wasn't smiling this time, she looked worried, like something was wrong. And she kept pointing to the wall. Which wall? I don't know. But it felt important. Over the next few nights, others had similar dreams. Night staff who never talked about ghosts. CNAS, even a doctor. All of them described Evelyn standing silently, pointing at the wall, always with urgency. We started comparing notes. The wall in their dreams was always pale blue, with a hairline crack near the baseboard. We found it in room 305. The hospital had been storing old equipment in there since the pandemic surge, but that wall matched every detail from the dreams. Maintenance was called. When they cut open the drywall, they found mold, black, thick, and spreading inside the walls like rot. The room above had a slow leak from a broken pipe unseen for years. The spores were airborne, dangerous. That wing was shut down immediately. An entire HVAC overhaul was ordered. Had she been trying to warn us? It's been nearly a year since that night. We still see her sometimes. Evelyn. Some nights I'll catch a glimpse of her reflection in the glass outside the nurse's station. Or I'll walk into a room and smell lavender, the kind she used to wear. Patients still whisper about the kind woman who visits them while they sleep. No one's scared anymore. In fact, we feel safer when she's around. Hospitals are filled with life and death, joy and grief. And sometimes, something lingers. Not out of spite or vengeance, but because they cared too much to truly leave. Evelyn is still doing her rounds, and every time I pass the dark end of the third-floor hallway, I offer a soft nod, just in case she's watching. If you're reading this and you've ever felt someone beside you in the quiet moments, someone who made you feel safe even when no one else was around, you're not alone. Sometimes the best nurses never stop caring, even after death. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I used to roll my eyes at stories about haunted hospitals or spirits stuck between worlds. I always thought people just needed an explanation for the strange or the unexplained. A coping mechanism, maybe, for grief or fear. But I was wrong. St. Mercy General is where this all happened. It's one of the older hospitals in Chicago, built sometime in the early 1900s. The newer wings are modern and bright, filled with the hum of machines and the smell of hand sanitizer. But the East Wing, the one hardly anyone talks about, is different. That part of the hospital is nearly 100 years old. The walls are thicker, the floors creak, and down below it, buried beneath layers of renovation and years of forgotten work orders, is the old basement. I never had any reason to go down there. Not in the 4 years I'd been working night shifts as a trauma nurse. Until one night, I did. But let me back up. When I first started at St. Mercy, I was fresh out of nursing school. Still had that mix of nerves and idealism. I shadowed under another nurse named Lisa Novak, one of those women who had seen it all and didn't flinch at the worst of it. She was sharp, a little cold, but efficient as hell. One night, during a slow shift, we were walking by the corridor near the east stairwell when she stopped suddenly and said, "Don't ever take the old stairs unless you have to." I laughed. "What's down there? Monsters?" She didn't smile, just shook her head and said, "No monsters, just something you don't want to see." That stuck with me, but as weeks turned into months, the memory faded, replaced by codes, blood work, and double shifts. Still, sometimes I'd hear whispers from other nurses during smoke breaks, stories of cold spots in the stairwell, of lights flickering in storage, of someone, always a woman, seen walking just at the edge of the hallway before disappearing. It was always vague, always dismissed with a laugh or an eye roll, but you know how it is in hospitals. Death lingers in the corners. People cope however they can. It was early December, a cold night, wind hammering the windows like it had teeth. I was on the second floor near ICU, reviewing notes on a patient when my charge nurse Daniel came over. "Hey Ellie," he said, rubbing his neck. "We're out of vacuum drains and central supplies already closed, but Sarah thinks there might be a box left in the old storeroom downstairs. Can you check?" I hesitated. "You mean the basement?" He nodded. "Yeah, the one near the old OR wing. Supposed to be a box of 50s down there. Should be quick." I almost said no. Something about it felt off, but I didn't want to be the one making a fuss over a simple supply run, so I agreed. The old stairwell was behind a faded wooden door, tucked away past radiology. I'd never noticed it before. When I pushed it open, the hinges groaned like something alive. Cold air met me immediately, thick with the scent of mildew and thyme. I clicked on my flashlight and started down. The stairs were narrow and steep, made of stone that had been worn smooth in the middle from decades of foot traffic. Every step echoed like I was walking through a tomb. When I reached the bottom, the door creaked shut behind me with a soft thud. I froze. For a moment, I considered turning back, but I shook it off and pressed forward. The basement was a long corridor with low ceilings and rusted shelving units. The light overhead flickered weakly, barely illuminating the rows of boxes and old equipment. I found the label for vacuum drains and followed it deeper into the shelves. And that's when I saw her. She was standing maybe 20 feet away, facing one of the metal shelves. At first, I thought it was another staff member. Her uniform was strange. An old-fashioned white dress with a high collar and long sleeves, the kind nurses wore in photos from 100 years ago. A white cap sat neatly on her head. "Excuse me?" I called out. She didn't move. I stepped closer. "Hey, are you all right?" Still nothing. She reached up slowly, as if she were checking a box on the shelf. Then she turned, and she wasn't there. No sound, no movement, just empty air where she had stood. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat. I wasn't imagining things. I saw her. I felt the air shift around me. The pressure in the room changed like someone had just walked out and slammed the door behind them. I grabbed the first box I could find and ran back up the stairs without looking back. Back upstairs, I must have looked pale because Daniel asked if I was okay. "I thought I saw someone down there," I said. He blinked. "Someone?" I nodded. "A woman, in an old uniform. She just vanished." He stared at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "You're not the first to say that." Later that night in the break room, I brought it up to Lisa. She sighed, took a sip of coffee, and said, "We call her Clara. No one really knows where the story started. Some say she died during the flu epidemic in 1918, treating patients non-stop until she collapsed. Others say she was a suicide, hung herself in one of the old surgical rooms. That's just a legend though, right?" Lisa looked at me. "Isn't everything until it isn't?" I started asking around, quietly, carefully. I spoke to custodians, night shift nurses, even an old security guard named Miguel. Every single one of them had a story. She walked past me in the hallway, plain as day, Miguel told me, but her feet didn't make a sound. One of the janitors claimed he heard weeping from one of the locked rooms in the basement, and a med student shaking told me he saw her standing outside the morgue freezer, hand pressed to the door like she was trying to comfort the dead inside. I wasn't sleeping well. I started dreaming about her. In my dreams, she was always just out of reach, watching me, waiting. Obsessed, I dug through hospital archives. With the help of Donna from medical records, I got access to old employee files. Most were scanned copies of paper logs from the early 1900s, faded handwriting, names long gone. And there she was, Clara W. Hensley, registered nurse, employed 1916 to 1918. No death record, but a note in the margin. Presumed deceased, pandemic ward collapse. That part of the hospital had caved in during the Spanish flu. Dozens had died. Some of the bodies were never recovered. A few weeks later, I got called to assist with an elderly patient on the East Wing. When I left the room, I took a wrong turn in the dark and ended up at the top of the old stairwell again. I didn't want to go down. But something, curiosity, maybe guilt, pushed me to open the door. This time the air was warm. Still, no mildew, no cold spots. I walked down, one hand on the rail. She was waiting at the bottom. But this time, she didn't vanish. She turned and looked at me. Her face was kind, tired, her eyes sunken with grief. "I didn't mean to stay," she whispered. "I know," I said, tears rising. "It's okay now." She smiled, then faded, like smoke into the air. Since then, no one's seen her. The basement is still quiet, still strange, but the heaviness is gone. I think Clara finally finished her rounds, and every time I pass the old stairwell, I pause. Not with fear anymore, but respect. Because sometimes the dead don't haunt us to harm. Sometimes they just want to finish what they started. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Not in the way movies show them, sheets floating down hallways or angry spirits slamming doors. I believed in pain, in death, in the slow, heavy silence that settles after someone dies on your shift. That kind of haunting is real. That kind of presence lingers. My name is Emily Carter. I'm a trauma nurse at Langridge Memorial Hospital, a mid-sized facility tucked between two sleepy suburbs in southern Illinois. I've worked night shifts for nearly 11 years, long enough to forget what normal sleep patterns feel like, long enough to know when something isn't just in your head. Langridge is the kind of place that's always busy, but never truly loud. It has this strange quiet even when the ER fills with cries, groans, and the metallic rattle of gurneys. Some people say the hospital was built over old farmland. Others say there used to be a psychiatric facility here in the 1950s. Maybe it's just old. Cold tiles, dim lights, creaky vents. Hospitals already feel half dead. You don't need ghosts for that. But what happened during one long winter night? That changed everything. It started quietly, as it always does. Late December. Snow blanketed everything outside, and the wind howled like a living thing against the side of the building. We were short-staffed, of course. Flu season had hit hard, and most of the newer nurses were already burning out. That night I was working with Marcus, our youngest charge nurse, and Carla, one of our regular night med techs. We also had an old security guard, Hal, making rounds. We joked about how dead the shift was going to be. It was around 2:15 a.m. when things changed. We had no incoming trauma, no ambulances, and the waiting room was nearly empty. Carla was restocking linens, Marcus was finishing charts, and I was at the nurses' station reviewing labs. That's when I saw him, out of the corner of my eye, by the automatic doors leading from the ER entrance to the ambulance bay. There was a little boy, not walking, just standing. I looked up, expecting a parent to come in behind him, but no one did. He wore a thin hoodie, way too small for the weather, and loose pajama pants that barely covered his ankles. His feet were bare. His skin was pale, like he hadn't been in the sun for weeks. I stood up slowly. "Hey, sweetie," I said, cautious but calm. "Where's your mom or dad?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me. His eyes weren't wide with fear. They were wide with confusion, like he didn't know where he was or why. I walked around the desk and took a step toward him. And then, he was gone. I didn't mean he ran, or slipped out a side door. He just wasn't there anymore. Gone like a blink. I froze, goosebumps crawling up my arms. I turned, scanning the ER. Nothing. Marcus looked up and saw my face. "What?" he asked. I swallowed. "Did you just see a kid by the doors?" He blinked. "Number was someone here?" I didn't answer right away. I just shook my head and told myself it had to be fatigue. We'd been slammed the past few days and I hadn't slept much. But it wasn't a hallucination. It didn't feel like one. A few nights passed. I didn't mention it again. What was I supposed to say? But then Carla brought it up casually during a break. "You ever see weird stuff on night shift?" she asked, unwrapping her protein bar. "Like, stuff you can't explain?" I paused. "Why?" She glanced at the security monitors. "Last night, around 2, I saw a little kid standing by the supply closet near the trauma bay. Thought it was a patient's sibling or something. But when I went to check, no one." My heart thudded. I kept my tone even. "How old?" 6 or 7 maybe. Dirty hoodie. No shoes." Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. More people started seeing him. One of the techs, Adam, swore he saw the boy walking behind a trauma room curtain right before a patient coded. Dr. Kayla Brandt, one of the ER physicians, nearly dropped her coffee when she stepped into the break room and saw the boy sitting in the corner staring at the floor. She said he looked up at her and smiled. The worst part? Security footage never caught any of it. We checked. Multiple times. The cameras would flicker, go staticky for a second, and by the time they cleared, the hallway or room would be empty. Hal, the night security guard, tried not to talk about it, but one night while walking me to my car, he muttered, "He's been around longer than you think. There are old reports. From back when I started. Always during quiet shifts, always when it snows." I started digging. It took a few weeks. After a few favors and hushed conversations with older staff, I learned something. Back in 1998, a boy named Jonah Reynolds was brought into Langridge Memorial after a house fire. He was 6 years old. 3rd-degree burns, smoke inhalation, collapsed lung. He was in critical condition when he arrived, but he was stable. They expected him to make it. Then something went wrong. His mother, who had been burned saving him, died an hour later in the adjacent trauma room. No one told him. He kept asking where she was. Nurses said he cried for her all night. He died at 2:17 a.m. Official cause: sudden cardiac arrest. But according to an old nurse named Sheila, he wasn't alone when he died. He was sitting upright, smiling. When she walked in, he whispered, "She's here," and then he flatlined. 1 week later, it happened again. Snowstorm. Power flickers. Backup generators hum. It was 2:17 a.m. again. I was in room 5, checking vitals on a patient recovering from surgery, when I felt something. A shift in the air. That impossible stillness before a noise. I turned, and there he was, standing just inside the doorway. Same hoodie, same blank expression, but this time he looked at me. Like he knew me. Like he'd been waiting. I didn't move. I didn't speak. He raised a hand like he wanted to reach out, but then he turned his head toward the hallway, toward trauma room 2. A second later, the code alarm blared. Room 2. We lost the patient within minutes. I've seen him 7 times now. Always on nights when snow falls. Always at 2:17 a.m. Always just before someone dies. He's not trying to scare us. He's warning us. Jonah doesn't scream. He doesn't rattle windows or knock things over. He just stands there, lost, waiting. And every time I see him, I feel that same cold pit in my stomach. Not fear, sadness. Maybe he's still looking for his mother. Maybe she never came for him. Maybe she's been looking too. But whatever it is, he's real. We don't talk about it during handoffs. New nurses are never told, but we all know. We know the signs. The cold draft through a sealed hallway, the lights that flicker at the exact same time every year, the bare footprints near the ambulance bay that lead nowhere. Last week I caught Marcus staring at nothing near the doors. "You saw him, didn't you?" I asked. He nodded, slow and pale. "Does it ever stop?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "No," I said, "but you stop needing it to make sense. Because not everything in a hospital has a diagnosis. Not everything that haunts you bleeds. Some things just wait. And in the quiet hours of a winter night when the snow falls and the ER goes still, we wait with him. Just in case he's finally found what he's looking for."